So when people think of minimalist design, I think it's always seen as very clean lined, not a lot of elements. But actually, minimalist design is of course stripped back with all the architectural details, but it's a lot of emphasis on the materials that you use. Eventually, the transition between the materials and how you play with them, that's going to be a lot more important in the overall design. Hi, I'm Aryan. I'm the principal designer for this house. The homeowners lived in this place for about 20 years. It's a 3-bedroom place. So when we started to reconfigure the space, it's like, okay, what do you need? How does your lifestyle evolve, obviously, and how does the place work with your current lifestyle? So when we got the brief, I think the house, we wanted to make it easy to maintain. I think that was the topic that we wanted to address because it's a couple with a dog. I think maintenance was key. I wanted to bring a little bit of a modern luxe feel in, but I feel modern luxe makes it a little bit glam. And we wanted to do this kind of understated, calm look. And I think modern luxe can also become a little serious. Although this is a minimalist approach, we were still quite whimsical when it came to the furniture, the color. So it's not like a very sterile, clean place. When I started the design for this place, actually I started with the flooring first. I wanted a combination of materials so that all the transitions were not necessarily at the wall portion. So it kind of like shifts your perspective a little bit in the space. So in the living room, using like 1/3 in like a wood tile, 2/3 in a marble tile, and then kind of get that pattern in the walkways as well. It just kind of like shifts your perception of the space. And it's quite nice to have like the seamless doors that we're using, that it kind of like blends a little bit differently. So that the wall kind of moves into the floor a little bit, and then the transition is kind of away from the actual point where you normally would have a transition. So then next, looking at all the materials, what we look at is obviously what kind of like colors do we want to use. So I wanted a very limited color palette, mostly like off-whites and dark browns or dark grays. The homeowners then injected it with a little bit of orange and reds. That's kind of like the colors that we picked up from the paintings and the artworks around, and also a little bit more playful elements that we then bring in. So when we looked at the marble on the walls, we kind of like picked up on those kind of like rusty, orangey tones as well, so that still you have a very limited color palette with maybe 2 or 3 different colors that we're using, but it still then gels together quite nicely. In the brief, the requirement was that maybe have like a walk-in wardrobe or a little bit more storage space. So I was like playing with the floor plan, and then I messaged them and said, are you okay with me throwing you a curveball? So I called it the curveball design proposal, where basically I combined the 2 bedrooms at the back into a master suite. I also annexed a little bit of the walkway so that I could do a lot bigger primary bathroom. We then could do like a proper walk-in wardrobe, which they pass through into the bedroom nook. So instead of keeping the primary bedroom where it was located, then that became like a study den area, and kind of like flipped the whole place upside down from where the primary bedroom is versus where it used to be. So when we were selecting furniture for the place, we kind of started off with things to be a little bit more angular, but then the more and more we started to work together, and we got a lot more experimental with like fun elements. So then we decided to make the dining table a little bit more odd shaped. It's a nice break of all the clean lines that we have. We then sourced like a piece of granite that kind of like had these tones of a bit of orangey browns, and then paired that with like little cube chairs that are also like orange but have a curvy kind of look. Then the rest of the furniture became a lot more relaxed in a way. The coffee table, it's a bit more of an island and it's a little bit more rigid, but the rest is a lot more softer because of slouchiness of the sofa. The materials that we use, which are all pet friendly, like I have a little ottoman, there's a little bobble. So you have all these like little tension of shapes that we're using as well. Since I was working with a limited color palette and also kind of like a limited material palette, I wanted to keep like visual interest into space. So that means that you start then using different kind of textures. For the TV, wanted to bring that marble back into the space as well. And then to contrast that, I thought, okay, instead of doing like a plain wall that is plastered, we did like this concaved fluted panel. And it's quite nice because when the daylight shines on it, it just creates a little bit of shadow effect. So when it came to the lighting, we kind of went with quite minimalist, understated ceiling lights. In the dining area, then we commissioned quite a natural shaped light. So it's kind of like a hand-forged branch out of brass, which is then blackened. And then the glass baubles are hand-blown specifically for the piece. So it's a Dutch designer that makes them. So the brand is Brand van Egmond. They are from a small town in the Netherlands. Fairly well known in the Netherlands because they do a lot of artisan pieces. I knew them obviously from the Netherlands. It's quite nice to work with them as they just entered Singapore market, and then we were able to commission something for this space. So the kitchen originally was an open kitchen. It was actually the only source of daylight that came from that part of the living space. I feel open kitchens are a little bit done. I don't think they're super practical, especially if you cook a lot. So my idea was to close the kitchen off. One, it gave me a lot more display and storage into the living space itself. And also it made the flow into the kitchen a lot better because where the windows used to be was where the fridge was, etc. So by flipping things around, cooking is then at the back wall. So actually where you use the space in the kitchen most is actually where all your daylight is. And then the slightly darker portion will be then where your fridge, your wine fridge, and the ovens and the tall cabinets all are. I think that was something that we also had to kind of discuss a little bit because obviously being able to use the space how I envision it, I needed to close the kitchen. But if you have been living with an open kitchen for a while, that's obviously a big change. So when we were looking for tiles, actually, which was one of the first trips when we were selecting materials, homeowners saw this oxidized copper stone, and they said like that would be ideal for the kitchen counter. Then I said, why don't we then just do a black countertop? But there's this laminate that has a kind of like oxidized patinaed copper. So then bring that into the carpentry itself. I did a thin black frame just to quiet the whole thing down a little bit. So then you have that little pop of color, which is kind of like this rust, orangey red tone that kind of like brings the whole color scheme kind of together. So it was definitely something that the homeowner really liked from a material point of view. And they bought these 4 tiles on one of their trips. They probably had it for years. So when we started the project, they kind of like gave me this, like if we can bring this into the design somewhere, that would be kind of cool. I kind of saw the walls to be a little bit more clean. So we did like a solid surface on the wall, but when we kind of cut it out, that we can then still mount the 4 tiles, and it becomes like a little bit of a focal point at the stove area. So one of the criteria for the walk-in wardrobe, next to obviously having ample storage, was also to create like a display for a collection of handbags and, well, mostly handbags, I guess. It's also quite nice that you can break up all the carpentry. So we have like the center portion with a focus for all the collection of handbags. And then we kind of did a small island just to kind of anchor the whole space. It's a tight space, so obviously we rounded the corners off just to make sure that you can kind of move in and out without bumping. You can put out your clothes and whatever you want to wear for the day. So in order for the primary bathroom to have enough space, I wanted to do like his and hers vanities. I actually pushed the whole bathroom portion out with about almost 2 meters, and then created like a wet zone which has the WC and the shower area, and then a dry zone which has like the double vanities. The dry zone, I wanted to create as much storage as possible. Obviously you got the vanities, but we also have like storage behind the mirrors, and I wanted it to be a little bit more glamorous in a way. So we worked with Gessi for the bathroom fittings. So these are these little jewels that kind of like accent the space quite nicely. We did a little bit of fluted textures on the vanity. Although it's very plain from a color perspective, it's like dark colors. The 2 rooms combined are not super big. So what we decided was to keep the bedroom as plain as possible. So I thought of designing a bit of a curved headboard that kind of like embraces you. We had this handmade woven velvet panel that kind of like sits on top. It was actually done in Italy. And then the rest of the headboard is in a slightly easier to maintain and clean fabric. But it Again, we had kind of like using 3 different materials, from a velvet to an upholstery and the wood, just to kind of create a cohesive look. So one of my favorite bathroom fitting suppliers is actually Gessi. Next to the whole experience sourcing for the fittings, the other thing what is nice, it has still this bit of a handcrafted quality. There's like these little knurled details or fluted details in the fittings itself as well. You can pick and choose like what kind of handles, what kind of finish, etc. So it's modular in a way where you just create your own specific look. They have a few ranges, so what we looked at was something that was slightly classic, but it has that modern touch to it, and a bit of a brass kind of a finish for the concealed mixers. And then we took a slightly different approach into the shower area. So the tone of the fittings are slightly different, also because it's slightly easier to maintain in a matte finish, so we have something that's a bit more gloss, shiny, in a polished feel in the dry area. And then we kind of picked something slightly different with a different kind of finish and a different kind of model in the wet area.
What will you change about this project?
What would I change in this project? Everything? No, I think